Good morning and welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. It is Friday, the 28th of October, 2022, and we are here for the continuation of the hearing in docket 2022-142-WS. It is the rate case application of Daufuskie Island Utility Company, Incorporated. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Present in the hearing room, we have Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Commissioner Caston, Chair Belser. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin and Commissioner Thomas. I note that Commissioner Justin Williams is on leave today and not participating. Any matters that need to come before us this morning, any preliminary matters before we get started? Thank you. I believe we are on Office of Regulatory Staff to present its case. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Knowles, please call your first witness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. ORS would call its first panel of Daniel Sullivan and David Herpel.
Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Herpel, please come forward. Before you get started, once you get seated, the court reporter will swear you in.
You'll both just raise your right hand, please. Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, I'll present Mr. Sullivan, and if it pleases the Commission, Mr. Huber will present Mr. Herpel.
Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Sullivan.
Good morning.
Would you please state your name and occupation?
My name is Daniel Sullivan. I'm employed by the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff as the Director of the Audit Department.
Are you the same Daniel Sullivan who pre-filed 37 pages of direct testimony in this case on September 29th, 2022?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed testimony?
No, I do not.
If I ask you the same questions today as those posed in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that Mr. Sullivan's direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Sullivan's direct pre-file testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 11 exhibits labeled exhibits DFS 1 through exhibits DFS 11, which were filed with the Commission as attachments to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to those exhibits?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that Mr. Sullivan's direct exhibits labeled DFS 1 through DFS 11 be marked for identification and entered into the record as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Sullivan's pre-filed exhibits accompanying his direct testimony labeled DFS 1 through DFS 11 will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit 12 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan, are you the same Daniel Sullivan who pre-filed 12 pages of surrebuttal testimony in this case on October 20th, 2022?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed surrebuttal testimony?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that Mr. Sullivan's surrebuttal testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Sullivan's pre-filed surrebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if read from the stand.
Mr. Sullivan, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 12 exhibits labeled surrebuttal exhibits DFS 1 through DFS 12, which were filed with the Commission as attachments to your pre-filed surrebuttal testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to those exhibits?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that witness Sullivan's surrebuttal exhibits labeled DFS 1 through DFS 12 be marked for identification and entered into the record as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Sullivan's pre-filed surrebuttal exhibits DFS 1 through DFS 12 will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit 13 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, if it pleases the Commission, we have a brief question and answer summary of Mr. Sullivan's pre-filed testimonies to present to the Commission.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan, what are the primary purposes of your direct testimony in this docket?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. My testimony sets forth ORS's findings and recommendations resulting from ORS's examination of the application of Daufuskie Island Utility Company in this docket. My testimony also addresses the Federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and ORS's recommendations regarding accumulated deferred income taxes, excess deferred income taxes, and excess federal income tax expense embedded in commission-approved rates since January 1st, 2018.
Would you please describe ORS's examination of the company's application?
ORS's examination of the company's application consisted of three major steps. In step one, ORS verified that the operating experience reported by the company in its application was supported by the company's accounting books and records for the test year ended December 31st, 2021. In the second step, ORS tested the underlying transactions to ensure they were adequately supported, had a stated business purpose, were allowable for rate-making purposes, and were properly recorded. Lastly, ORS's examination consisted of adjusting, as necessary, the revenues, expenditures, and capital investments to normalize the company's operating experience and rate base in accordance with generally accepted regulatory principles and prior commission orders.
What do your direct testimony and direct exhibits DFS 1 through DFS 4 reflect?
My direct testimony reflects ORS's proposed revenues and adjustments based on the capital structure, cost of debt, and return on equity, or ROE, recommendations of ORS witness McGlone. ORS's proposed revenues and adjustments are reflected in column 4 of exhibits DFS 1, DFS 2, and DFS 3, and also in exhibit DFS 4. Those proposed revenues and adjustments result in an ROE of 9.07%. That is reflected in the After ORS Adjustments section on exhibit DFS 8.
Please describe your recommendations in your direct testimony related to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
My direct testimony recommends the Commission order the company to obtain the services of an independent professional tax accountant to calculate the actual balance of accumulated deferred income taxes and the portion of that balance that is excess deferred income taxes due to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act prior to the company's next rate case. The company's books and records and application omitted any calculation of accumulated deferred income taxes. Therefore, the company did not include a revaluation of accumulated deferred income taxes in order to calculate excess deferred income taxes and did not propose a return of excess deferred income taxes to customers related to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Mr. Sullivan, did your direct testimony include any other recommendations related to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act?
Yes, it did. My direct testimony recommends the creation of a regulatory liability in the amount of $384,287 to return to customers excess federal income tax expense embedded in commission-approved rates since January 1st, 2018. The calculation of this regulatory liability is reflected in my exhibit DFS 9. My direct testimony further recommends the regulatory liability be refunded to current customers over a 5-year period through a rate decrement rider, which is discussed in ORS witness Hunnell's direct testimony. My direct testimony then cites and summarizes other dockets in which the Commission has addressed the impacts of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
What is your response in your surrebuttal to the company's rebuttal testimony regarding the establishment of a regulatory liability for excess federal income tax expense?
In summary, my surrebuttal testimony reaffirms ORS's recommendation for the company to record a regulatory liability in the amount of $384,287 as required by Commission Order number 2018-308, and that the liability be returned to customers over 5 years through a Tax Cuts and Jobs Act decrement rider. In addition, my surrebuttal notes that the company does not provide an alternative calculation for the calculation of excess taxes collected from customers.
Which ORS adjustments that you proposed did the company not accept in its rebuttal testimonies?
The company did not accept certain adjustments to plant and service, which was ORS Adjustment 9, depreciation expense, ORS Adjustment 3, and accumulated depreciation, ORS Adjustment 10. The company also did not accept my recommendation to establish a regulatory liability due to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to reflect compliance with Commission Order 2018-308. My surrebuttal testimony addresses those items.
What adjustments to plant and service that you recommended did the company accept?
While the company didn't accept some plant and service adjustments, they did accept others through Company Witness White's Rebuttal Exhibit GCW1, Schedules WB.2 and SB.2. Through those schedules, the company has accepted ORS adjustments to plant and service associated with the Melrose docket number 2005-74 WS. In addition, the company accepted other plant and service removals, adjustments, and additions as noted in my surrebuttal testimony on page 5 and highlighted in gray on my surrebuttal exhibit DFS 5. Regarding the $699,361 in disputed plant, for which Commission Order number 2021-132 specified that the parties agreed to reserve their positions, $332,988 remains in dispute.
Did ORS update its adjustments to plant and service, depreciation expense, and accumulated depreciation based on the company's rebuttal?
Yes and no. ORS updated plant and service by $22,310 for the inclusion of costs associated with the ongoing condemnation proceeding. This did not result in increased depreciation expense or accumulated depreciation, as those costs are included in land and therefore are not depreciated. ORS did not make any other changes in surrebuttal to plant and service depreciation expense or accumulated depreciation based on the company's rebuttal testimony.
Did you update your exhibits based on that update to plant and service?
Yes, my surrebuttal exhibits DFS 1 through DFS 8 reflect that update to plant and service due to the company's rebuttal. My surrebuttal exhibit DFS 5 details ORS's plant and service depreciation expense and accumulated depreciation and CIAC adjustments. My surrebuttal exhibit DFS 9 is the same as my direct testimony exhibit DFS 9, which shows the calculation of the regulatory liability due to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. My surrebuttal exhibit DFS 10 reflects ORS's proposed accounting and pro forma adjustments and reflecting the company's proposed increase. My surrebuttal exhibit DFS 11 reflects ORS's proposed accounting and pro forma adjustments and the revenue increase necessary using the company's proposed capital structure, cost of debt, and return on equity recommendations. And finally, my surrebuttal exhibit DFS 12 reflects ORS's proposed accounting and pro forma adjustments and the revenue increase necessary using the Department of Consumer Affairs proposed capital structure, cost of debt, and return on equity recommendations.
Mr. Sullivan, does this conclude your summary of your pre-filed testimonies?
Yes, it does.
And Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to Mr. Huber to present Mr. Herpel.
Thank you, Mr. Knowles. Mr. Huber?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the Commission. Mr. Herpel, can you please state your name and by whom you are employed and in what capacity?
Yes. My name is David Herpel, and I am employed by the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff as an audit manager.
Mr. Herpel, I'm going to ask you to get that microphone right in front of you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Herpel, will you please state your educational background and experience?
Yes. After I graduated high school in 1990, I enlisted in the United States Air Force and from 1990 to 1994. After I served in the Air Force, I attended the University of South Carolina and I received my Bachelor of Science degree with a major in accounting in 1998. I received my Certified Public Accountant license in 2004, and my license is currently active in the state of South Carolina. Prior to my employment with ORS, I spent approximately 8 years in private accounting at various levels ranging from staff accountant to controller. I have also spent approximately 15 years in public accounting, performing audits, reviews, compilations, certain tax returns. I joined ORS in May of 2021 in my current role.
Thank you, Mr. Herpel.
Yes,
Are you the same David Herpel who pre-filed 16 pages of direct testimony in this case on September 29th, 2022?
yes I am.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
If I ask you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that Mr. Herpel's direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Herpel's direct pre-filed testimony will be entered into the record as if read from the stand.
Are you the same David Herpel who pre-filed 11 pages of rebuttal testimony in this case on October 20th, 2022?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that Mr. Herpel's rebuttal testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Herpel's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if read from the stand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Herpel, did you also prepare one exhibit marked rebuttal exhibit DMH1, which is pre-filed along with your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to that exhibit?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that witness Herpel's one exhibit labeled rebuttal exhibit DMH1 be entered into the record of the case as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Rebuttal exhibit DMH1, which accompanied Mr. Herpel's rebuttal testimony, will be a composite exhibit. Well, yes, it's just one, multiple pages. Marked for identification as hearing exhibit 14 and entered into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, if it pleases the Commission, we have a brief question and answer summary of Mr. Herpel's direct and rebuttal testimonies to present.
Please proceed, Mr. Huber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Herpel, what was the purpose of your direct and rebuttal testimonies in this case?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. The purpose of my direct testimony is to set forth ORS's findings and recommendations resulting from ORS's examination of Daufuskie Island Utility Company, Incorporated, herein referred to as DIUC in this docket. These findings and recommendations are included in my direct testimony. My direct testimony also addresses and explains specific adjustments proposed by ORS. My rebuttal testimony addresses the rebuttal testimony of DIUC witnesses Guastella and White. Specifically, I respond to the company's rebuttal testimony regarding inflation, the deferral of the appellate litigation expenses related to the pending appeal to the South Carolina Supreme Court in the company's previous case, and the exclusion of unamortized balance of rate case expenses from rate base.
Mr. Herpel, what adjustments discussed in your direct testimony did the company accept in its rebuttal?
The company accepted the following adjustments that I discussed in my direct testimony. Annualized payroll-related expenses to reflect known and measurable increases, employee insurance benefits to reflect pro forma premiums and covered employees, not adjusting for customer growth, increase outside services management fees, premium costs for insurance to reflect pro forma premiums for all insurances, reclassify DHEC drinking water annual bills and reclassify DHEC land application permits, adjust regulatory commission expense to reflect the most recent DHEC drinking water annual bills and the most recent DHEC land application permits, and adjust the level of payroll taxes to reflect pro forma wages.
Please summarize your testimony in regard to inflation.
ORS adjusted the test year to remove the company's usage of inflation in its accounting and pro forma adjustments based upon the rationale that 1, inflation is not known and measurable. 2, ORS is respecting and continuing to follow the guidance issued by the Commission in prior decisions regarding inflation. 3, rate applications must be based on a historic 12-month test period. And 4, including inflation shifts the risk from the company to the customers, because once those costs are embedded in rates, the customers will pay for the costs that may not occur going forward. The Commission has previously determined in Order Number 2019-341 in the 2018 Duke Energy Progress rate case that, and I quote, inflation costs are necessarily based on projections and estimates and serve to shift the risks from the company to the customers, end quote. And in Order Number 2019-323, in the 2018 Duke Energy Carolinas rate case, the Commission found, quote, prospective adjustments for inflation to be generalized and speculative and not known and measurable, end quote, and declined to grant them.
Please summarize your testimony regarding your recommendation that the appellate litigation expenses related to the company's pending appeal to the South Carolina Supreme Court be deferred.
ORS recommends that the appellate litigation and consulting expenses that relate to the company's pending appeal to the South Carolina Supreme Court in connection with its argument for reparations in its prior case be deferred until the appeal is concluded. ORS's recommendation is consistent with the Commission's practice to defer litigation-related costs for pending litigation where the outcome is unknown and undetermined. Accordingly, it is ORS's position that it is premature to determine the rate-making treatment of these expenses because the outcome of the appeal is unknown. The appellate litigation and consulting expenses related to DIUC's pending appeal should be deferred until the South Carolina Supreme Court rules on the reparations issue and the matter is fully resolved.
Please summarize your testimony in regard to the exclusion of unamortized balance of rate case expenses from rate base.
ORS recommends excluding the unamortized balance of rate case expenses from rate base. Excluding the unamortized balance of rate case expenses from rate base and including the amortized portion and operating expenses allows for a reasonable cost sharing between the customers and the shareholders. The company recovers its cost for rate case expenses through amortization expense. And if the unamortized balance of rate case expenses is included in rate base, the company would also earn a return on these expenses. Further, if the company is allowed to include the unamortized balance of rate case expenses in rate base, it may serve as a disincentive to efficiently manage expenses so as to earn a higher return. This Commission's policy has been to exclude such expenses from rate base. In addition, should the Commission decide to change its policy to include the unamortized balance of rate case expenses in rate base, ORS recommends the Commission to include in DIUC's balance of the overcollection of taxes due to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in rate base as a regulatory liability. If the customer should bear the additional cost of adding the unamortized rate case expense to rate base, then the customer should also receive a benefit from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act regulatory liability in rate base. To do otherwise would be unfair and inconsistent.
Does this conclude your summary?
Yes, it does.
Thank you, Mr. Herpel.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, Mr. Herpel and Mr. Sullivan are now available for questions from the parties in the Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. Department of Consumer Affairs, any cross?
No, thank you.
Property Owners Association, interveners, any cross?
No questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Gressett, any cross on behalf of the applicant?
Yes, please.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Mr. Gressett.
I'm going to try, if I can, to ask Mr. Sullivan a few questions and then ask you a few questions.
Yes, sir.
So you don't have to feel like you're going to be on the hot seat the whole time. Mr. Sullivan, what is your title at ORS?
Director of the Audit Department.
And what do your responsibilities include?
Include managing the day-to-day activities of the Audit Department, employee personnel matters, such as leave, making sure they're getting training, but then also managing the audits, the reviews that we're performing, whether it be electric, gas, water, wastewater, telecommunications. We got electric co-op reviews now, just overseeing whether it's rate cases or it's our yearly dockets, making sure we have the appropriate people assigned to the right dockets or the right activities that we have going on. And then also, like in this case, performing actually some audits. So I think that covers the majority of it.
Okay. And tell me just briefly, what does an audit encompass?
Well, in this case, in a rate case, the company files an application. ORS reviews the application, obviously submits discovery request to get documentation to support the company's application, to support the adjustments that the company is asking to include in the application. We ask for the underlying financial data. We look at the underlying financial data. We do comparisons from year to year to look for variances in accounts, to see some accounts that might have gone up, gone down. That helps us focus areas that we're going to look at during our audit. We then sample transactions from the general ledger, from certain expense accounts. Obviously, in this case, plant service is a issue, but in every case, we test a sample of plant additions, usually since the company's last rate case. And we do this to just make sure that what the company is reporting on their books and records, and ultimately that has made it into their application, is actually supported by underlying data, and can be by invoices, any other supporting documentation.
And for underlying data to support items of plant, is their actual existence within the system something that's considered?
Yeah, we look for third party, whether it be invoices, whether it be appraisals. Mostly everything is supported by invoices. It's very uncommon that we have plant and service supported by anything else. Maybe some journal entries, where the company capitalized some time that might be included in plant service. That wouldn't be covered by an invoice. But there would be some supporting documentation showing the time that the employee spent and why that time was capitalized.
Okay. In your testimony, I believe that you cite South Carolina Code 58.4-10. ORS represents the public interest defined by that code section, representing the concerns of the using and consuming public with respect to public utility services, regardless of the class of customer, and preservation of continued investment in and maintenance of utility facilities so as to provide reliable and high quality service. Is that the mission of ORS?
Yes.
And has that mission changed recently?
Depends on your definition of recently, but yes, a couple years ago it did change.
Okay. And what's the difference between the current mission and the former?
If I remember correctly, the former mission was to balance the interest of the using and consuming public and, for lack of a better word, the utilities.
Okay. And how does that difference impact your audit analysis now versus prior to the change, if at all?
From an audit perspective, the change in mission really did not affect the procedures we perform.
Did it change how you evaluate recommendations to the commission?
No, and I mean I hate to use this term, but I mean from an auditing perspective, things are kind of black and white, you know? I mean, so no, I wouldn't say it changed our recommendations.
Okay. For the utility plant and service at issue in this case, did Daufuskie provide you with a list of each utility plant item included in the plant utility they requested?
Could you ask that one more time, please?
Sure. For there is a portion of the DIUC requested plant and service that you, on behalf of ORS, are recommending be excluded, correct? And what is that amount?
The remaining amount now, I believe, is $332,988.
Okay. And does this represent what we often refer to as the Melrose assets that came over, along with some additional Hague Point assets?
Yes, I was waiting to hear the additional head point because, you know, throughout this hearing, I've just heard Melrose, but it's not just comprised of only Melrose assets.
Right. So if I understand correctly, within the 330-ish, to be clear for the commission, there has been a lot of discussion about assets coming from Melrose. That makes a part of that number. And so how they were booked, we'll talk about, makes a difference for those. But the Hague Point items did not come from Melrose, did they?
I do not believe, no.
Okay. So when I talk about Melrose, I'm talking about the portion that came from Melrose. Did the information provided by the utility give you the items in that set of Melrose items for plant?
I don't recall if it provided information for every single item. I do remember the information I was provided, and what I was provided was basically Excel spreadsheets with dates, some vendor names, and some amounts. Some of them added up to some assets that were in question that were part of the 699. We'll call it 699, although in my testimony it's really 717, but we won't go there yet. And then there was, on some of those Excel spreadsheets, there was question marks for dates, question marks for vendors. So did it cover all of those items? I really didn't look at it in detail enough to see if it did.
Okay. And why did you not look at it in detail enough to see what was covered?
Well, it was an Excel spreadsheet, and I already had on the depreciation schedule provided by Daufuskie the asset. What I was looking for was the underlying support, and I don't believe an Excel spreadsheet with dates and vendors and amounts is adequate supporting documentation. Now, it would have been nice to have that spreadsheet to break down how each asset was calculated, but then to have an invoice associated with each one of those lines to support that total amount.
But Daufuskie didn't actually purchase those items such that they would have ever been provided an invoice, did they?
Ask that question again, sorry.
The Melrose items were purchased by Melrose, right?
Yes, I guess, because I did the 2005 Melrose audit myself.
Okay.
That was one of my first audits at ORS, and I actually, some of the items that were in question in this case associated with that 2005 docket, they were removed by me along with an old employee at ORS, Willie Morgan, due to the fact we weren't provided supporting documentation then.
Have you ever disclosed that before today?
Disclosed that I actually worked on Melrose? I have testimony filed in that case.
Have you ever disclosed in this case that when you worked in that case, you excluded some of those invoices at that time?
I disclosed it internally.
Have you provided it ever to Daufuskie?
I'm not sure. My lawyers would have to answer what was provided in discovery.
Would you think that was relevant?
I imagine the company knew, and that's why they agreed to remove out the items from 2005.
Which company?
Daufuskie. As part of Gary White's rebuttal testimony in this case, they have agreed to the plant items that were removed in that 2005 docket that I was partially responsible for.
Okay. And was there an ORS review of these items of plant in 2011?
Yes, and that was not performed by me.
And who conducted that?
Jay Jasinski, which was predecessor of as the director of the audit department, and I believe a Christina Stutz, who worked at ORS for several years and been gone for a while.
And then after they did their work, am I correct in the previous case, 2014-346, that Ivana Gearhart just brought those numbers forward?
Yeah, so what we do typically in an audit, if we're let's just say, we won't use Daufuskie as an example. Let's just use any company. So if they file a rate case in 2015, and we sample items in 2015 associated with plant that the company cannot support, then in the next, let's say they file a rate case in 2018. Well, ORS is going to roll forward the removals from 2015, because in the 2018 case, we're not going to go back and look at anything prior to 2015. We're going to concentrate our efforts on 2015 through 2018. So yes, it is common practice, it's ORS's practice, to roll forward plant and service adjustments from one case to the next.
And ORS does that even if in a case is resolved by settlement as opposed to order from the commission.
Unless the settlement specifically states that the items within plant disallowed by ORS are no longer disallowed for the future, then yes, we would continue to roll that forward.
Okay. And has ORS ever attempted to provide some sort of objective analysis of the value of the excluded items?
Since I've been at ORS, common practice is that the burden of proof is on the utility. And then once that evidence or the support is provided by the company, then ORS might perform an analysis of what is provided by the company. So I don't recall of any situation where a company couldn't support their numbers, so ORS conducted a study to support it for them.
DIUC provided the books and records it obtained from Melrose related to these items of plant, correct?
They provided Excel spreadsheets. I would not call them books and records. When I think of books and records, I think of general ledger or trial balance. This did not appear to me to be a general ledger or a trial balance. It appeared to me to be Excel spreadsheets with, like I said, dates, vendor names, and numbers on them.
And did ORS explain to you that those spreadsheets are what they received from the bankruptcy trustee?
I think you meant DIUC, right? You said
DIUC,
yeah.
sorry.
Yes, I believe that's the company's assertion. But my response to that is because they received them from Melrose, that doesn't really give me a lot of confidence, because, as I said earlier, Melrose was struggling to support the plant and service that they had recorded on their books in 2005. I would question the validity of what Melrose was including or recording.
So based on your experience in the 2005 case, when you came in to analyze the information in Daufusky's 2014 case and the current one, you believed that the documents brought forward from Melrose, because of your experience in 2005, were less reliable than they should be?
Well, first of all, I didn't perform the review in 2014. So I was part of that case, but not on the initial review of that information.
Did you testify about the plant and utility in the last case?
Yes, I did. But it was on the remand from the Supreme Court, and the company had presented no new evidence. The Supreme Court had isolated certain components of plant to be included, the well site, the elevated storage tank. So my review as part of that remand from the Supreme Court was simply that.
And did you take any position in that testimony related to the then 699-361 of excluded Melrose plant?
Yes, I supported what had been done.
Okay. And did you do that because you believed it to be the appropriate position to take based on what you learned in 2005?
No, that 2005 didn't have anything to do with that.
So you just copied the witness before you in the original portion of 2014 for that testimony?
I supported what the witness had put forth in the 2014 docket, but made changes based on the Supreme Court's order.
So if I understand you correctly, when you came to provide testimony on remand in the 2014 case, you had not provided the testimony about the plant Ms. Gearhart had in the original case, correct?
I'm not following you, I'm sorry.
You did not provide testimony in the initial phase of the 2014 case regarding this plant.
Correct.
After the appeal, when the Supreme Court said, ORS, you should include the elevated tank and a couple of other things, and it came back down, you testified in that case, including the elements specifically provided from the Supreme Court, correct?
Yes, we included the elevated storage tank and the well site.
And for the other items that the previous witness had excluded, you just copied the testimony over?
I don't believe I copied. I wrote my own testimony. I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time finding how this is relevant, because what I did in this docket, since I'm working on this docket, was due to the settlement agreement in 2021, where the parties agreed that the 699, we would reserve our positions to deal with this in this case. And so we opened up everything again to support items that have been removed out in 2005, 2011, 2014. So that's what I did in this docket.
Okay. And in this docket, Daufuskie explained to you again that it was providing the limited data it got from Melrose, correct?
Yes.
And restated again that Melrose had been in bankruptcy and deserted the island, so it was all they had from Melrose.
Yes.
And the department determined that that was insufficient as to certain assets.
Yes.
Okay. So is it your position that what DIUC provided in this very unique situation was not sufficient to meet the initial burden of production required of a utility?
It wasn't support to include the items they sought to include in planned service.
The information that DIUC put forward is presumed to be reasonable, correct?
I believe that is y'all's position, but no, I don't agree. I think that's. Say that again. Sorry.
Madam Chair, I'll just object to the extent that Mr. Gressett is asking Mr. Sullivan for a legal opinion.
I'm asking Mr. Sullivan how he decides to do his job.
I don't think that question had to do with a legal opinion. I'm going to overrule that objection. It's in your witness.
Party? Understood.
I thought I've already gone through how I do my job.
Do you, when the utility provided information in this unique situation regarding these Melrose assets, did you make a determination that that data was insufficient?
Yes.
And in making that determination, did you include any presumption of reasonableness as to the data submitted to you?
No, I did not apply any presumption of reasonableness. I was
Okay.
looking for the support, third-party support for those items.
You were looking for third-party contemporaneous support for assets purchased by a previous company that went bankrupt, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But I mean, Mr. Gressett, if ORS allowed Excel spreadsheets as supporting documentation for any company seeking to include, whether it's an expense or a plant item. I mean, can you imagine what that would do? I mean, why would any company ever provide any third-party support?
Well, what if a company can't because they took over a defunct utility and the records just don't exist? When they bring them to you and they say, this is all we have, you have two choices. You can reject it or accept it, right?
Or, yes, accept it or reject it. Or the company, knowing, since this has been going on since 2005, 2011, 2014, should perform some type of cost study to get additional support.
Okay, now what if you had presumed that these documents supporting the Melrose plant items were presumed to be reasonable and that Daufuskie had met its initial burden? Wouldn't ORS then be obliged to provide something substantive and objective in response?
If the company had provided anything to support the reasonableness of those items, then ORS would have looked at that.
I understand. And what you're saying is that when you looked at that, you did not presume the information to be reasonable.
Correct.
I am asking you, if you had presumed that documentation to be reasonable, what would you have done next?
Then we would have allowed those items. If the company could support that they were reasonable, we would have allowed those items.
If ORS took the position that those pieces of information were presumed reasonable, ORS would have allowed them.
And ORS would only do that if we were given enough support to make that presumption. But there has not been that support. I mean, there's not been the support provided to support that these items are reasonable. I mean, if you look at my depreciation schedule, the names on these items is equipment. Is that talking about the Elmo over here, the computer screen over there? I mean, there's not enough information there at all to determine really anything.
And your determination, just to be clear, is about a lack of information in this unique circumstance, not some determination that DIUC's done something imprudent, right?
I've made no assertion that DIUC's done anything imprudent. I was going to state it again. DIUC has not supported the items that they've sought to include in plant service.
And that's because the information they provided you didn't, in your opinion, come with a presumption of reasonableness, right?
I'm just going to object that it's asked and answered at this point. We've spent quite a bit of time on this line and we're not covering any new ground.
Mr. Grasset, I'm gonna have to agree. We need to move on because yeah, let's move on.
Did you review the exhibit provided by Mr. Guastella? Let me find it.
JCG1.
With the information from Compass South Attack?
Well, yes, I performed a cursory review.
And if I recall, you didn't respond to that in any way. Can you remind me what your testimony says about that?
I believe my testimony, I don't know if my testimony referred to this exhibit at all, as I believe ORS have filed a motion to strike. It might have said that. I think it might have said that in my testimony. Sorry.
I believe what it says is that ORS has filed a motion to strike, so you were not going to respond to it, correct?
Okay, yes.
And did you discuss with anybody in the department whether you should respond to that rebuttal exhibit?
Yes, we discussed the rebuttal exhibit
Okay, who's
within ORS.
I'll just object to the extent that the question is asking for any communications Mr. Sullivan had with his legal team.
Yeah, let's don't include any legal discussions. You said department. Are you just talking audit department?
I don't want to know. I don't want anything about what your lawyers told you. I want to know why you decided not to respond to that exhibit.
As my testimony states, we filed a motion to strike this exhibit, to exclude this exhibit, so that there was no, because of that, there was no need to respond to my testimony.
And do you understand that the commission has taken that ruling under advisement?
Yes, I'm aware.
What if the commission rules against the motion? You will have no response to that exhibit. You understand that, right?
Yes. I can respond now if you would like me to.
There is some discussion in the motion to strike about the Handy-Whitman indices. Does ORS ever endorse use of the Handy-Whitman indices?
I have seen Handy-Whitman indices used in other dockets, and yes, I don't know if I wouldn't use the word endorse, but we know that the Handy-Whitman indices is a common tool used by utilities.
I'm going to read to you from order number 2020-561. It says, ORS raised two issues related to valuation of the PRC plant, asserting one, the Handy-Whitman indices, HW indices, should have been used instead of another thing to trend reproduction costs back to original cost. That seems to me to be ORS taking the position in that case that the Handy-Whitman indices is a preferred method, at least in that circumstance.
Yes, I heard what you read. It said ORS believed they should have used the Handy-Whitman index.
And that's docket 2019-281. You provided testimony in that case, didn't you?
Mr. Gressick, could you identify the docket name? I don't
Sure, I'll
follow
pull the pages out. Let me get the one
I
down here
don't
with
follow
the cover.
numbers all that well.
And Madam Chair, would a copy be available for Mr. Sullivan?
I'm happy to hand the witness the marked up pages I was just reading from.
Would you show it as counsel and then give it to Mr. Sullivan, please, if need be?
This is the application of Palmetto Utilities Incorporated for adjustment of its rates and increases, docket number 2019-281, order 2020-561.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to show counsel. I didn't mean to be confusing. That's the Palmetto Utilities case. Did you participate in that case?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And do you recall any recommendation by ORS beyond what I've read to you regarding use of the Handy-Whitman indices?
I do not. I think my testimony, I call that the COVID docket because I believe that during the middle of that's when COVID hit. I believe my testimony, my direct testimony in that case dealt solely with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I could be wrong, but that's my recollection. And I really didn't have any responsibilities associated with the valuation of the PRC plant. There's another witness in this room, ORS witness Hunnell, that might have some more information regarding that.
But as the supervisor of that department, you would have been responsible ultimately for the recommendation that was made by ORS in that audit?
No, I don't believe the audit department was the one that made the recommendation in that case. I believe it was either through the wastewater department or consultant. I don't believe it was the audit. Now, we would have took the number that was provided to us and have included it on audit department exhibits, as the audit department obviously presents all the financial aspects, but the audit department didn't have anything to do with the valuation in that case, Mr. Gresson.
Okay. And do you recall, last question, whether or not ORS filed the testimony of Mr. Loy in that case?
That sounds familiar. That's why I said consultant. I wasn't sure, but that sounds familiar.
And if Mr. Loy filed testimony on behalf of ORS, he would have had ORS's endorsement of that testimony before he filed it?
Correct.
Are you aware of any deficiencies with the operation of the Daufuskie system?
I believe ORS witness Hunter would be the better witness to answer that question.
That was going to be my next question after you asked me whether that was something that is considered in the audit department and audit work that you did in this case. Does customer feedback play into any of your analysis?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. And is there another ORS witness whose work in the case would include some evaluation of customer feedback?
I believe that would be ORS witness Hunter.
Thanks, sir. May I pause and ask counsel a question? Okay, that's fine. I just wanted you to have a chance. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. As always, I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Mr. Gresson.
Afternoon, Mr. Herpel.
Good morning, Mr. Gressett.
I didn't get to shake your hand yesterday, but we did get to meet. Thank you for that.
It's an odd place to meet you.
How long have you been with ORS?
Just about a year and a half. I started in May of 2021.
And before that, where were you employed?
McGregor and Company, CPA firm here in Columbia.
Do you supervise any of the other ORS witnesses who will testify in this proceeding?
I do not.
Do you confer with the other witnesses for ORS before completing testimony in an audit?
We do.
And did you confer with the other ORS employees participating in this case before you all completed your work?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Have you ever discussed this case with Mr. Rothschild?
No, sir.
Am I correct that your testimony is that the disallowance of the requested inflation adjustment is based upon your understanding that the commission has previously decided in other cases not to include an inflation adjustment?
That is correct. That's in my testimony, but I have other reasons besides just stating the fact that history decides my decision.
Okay. And it is your position that as we sit here today, that inflation is not known and measurable?
That is correct. That's my position, or ORS's position, I should say.
Yes. And if I understand correctly, under your disallowance of inflation, the company and its owners will now bear the risks of inflation and not the customers?
Yes, if inflation is included, it will shift the risk to the customers.
Okay. So it's your intent in not allowing the inflation adjustment to have the owners of the utility to bear the risk of inflation?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's because once the inflation amounts are embedded in rates, the customers will be responsible for those inflation amounts regardless at the level going forward. And in thinking about that, it was brought up yesterday, and I believe the day before, the witnesses for the company speak of transportation and fuel specifically. So I'd like to build on that analogy in their position. I understand, for example, the gasoline back in the spring, we were paying close to $5 a gallon. Driving here today, I purposely paid attention to the gas prices, and I think I saw it as low as $3.17.
Where was that? I need to go.
It was on, I believe, Elmwood. And so based on that, and based on the company's position, the company would still be paying the $5 a gallon. And they would continue to pay that $5 a gallon until they come back in for another rate case, and the customers would be responsible for that. So yes, it's unknown and measurable and speculative.
Okay, and it's possible, though, that when you were looking in the next rate case you just described at the company's actual costs, that if the actual costs as a whole produced an inappropriate gain by the utility because of the inflation adjustment, that could be corrected in the next rate case, right?
Yes, because South Carolina is applications must be filed on a historic 12-month test period. And so we would, in the next rate case, then look at their test year expenses and make our determination then.
Okay, so this idea that once the commission allows it, it'll be forever embedded is not really accurate, is it?
I wouldn't use the word forever, but I would say until the next rate case.
Okay, so it's embedded in the rates until the next rate case.
Yes, sir.
And it could be changed and addressed in the next rate case.
Correct.
Okay. Before filing your testimony, did you discuss with Ms. McGlone that in addition to having the shareholders absorb inflation costs, that they should also be required to absorb the costs related to ORS's position on the unamortized balances in rate base?
I honestly don't recall having specific conversations with Ms. McGlone on that specifically.
So when different folks working on different adjustments like that are participating in an audit, it sounds like you do some work with conversation and some work independently. Is that fair?
We do, absolutely.
Does there come a time when it is all combined that someone or some group evaluates the whole result?
Yeah, I don't deny that. I'm sure that occurs.
Okay, so in other words, there is some mechanism in place where you have various folks doing various pieces of the rate puzzle, and then when those pieces are put together, it's evaluated overall to determine if any changes should be made in those individual pieces?
I wouldn't deny that.
Okay. We received a document production on the 28th. That was the day we started our hearing here from Mr. Huber, and it included an email from you.
Yes,
That email, are you familiar with it?
I am. Yes, sir.
Okay. That email, is there a reason that it wasn't included in the original discovery?
It wasn't done on purpose, I can tell you that.
Do you know why it wasn't included?
In our discovery to DIUC,
Yes.
It wasn't until it was asked for in the discovery after the fact, then when you all issued your first discovery, we issued it to you, yes.
Okay.
Are you referring to the follow-up from Nasuka, or are you referring to the original email? I'm sorry, I'd like clarification on which email you're referring to.
Oh, I'm sorry, let me,
But I agree, there was a second email that Mr. Huber sent to you. And I made it clear, even when in your first discovery, I stated if I missed anything, it was not on purpose.
oh, yes, sir, I'm not, so it's clear, I'm not accusing you of
I understand.
intentionally leaving it out. I just wanted to figure out in the system sort of what happened.
Yes, sir. I just want to make sure we were talking about the same email.
The email I'm talking about is dated September 27th, and it's from you to Blake Kruger.
Madam Chair, can we ask that the witness be able to see a copy of the email so we
Sure.
knows what is being referred to?
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to give them copies too? We'll also provide copies to council. We have a few over here.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Okay, sir. Sorry about all that.
No, it's fine.
All right, so there were two lines of questions I had. One was, is there any reason that you knew of why this document was produced the day of the trial? You didn't have a reason, did you?
No.
Okay. The second is, who is Blake Kruger?
He is the head of the Accounting and Finance Department, or department, lack of a better term, for Nasuka.
Can you tell me what that abbreviation stands for?
Yes, it's the National Association of...
Maybe down here.
I'm sorry, I can't think of the off the top of my head. I apologize.
I can tell you if you want to know.
Sure.
National Association of State Utility Consumer Advocates, I believe it is.
Okay. And what is that organization, sir?
I guess it's a group of folks from around the country that are professionals in the same organizations who discuss and certain issues and to oversee and make sure that certain issues are responded to or and talk about hot topics.
Okay, so am I correct that you emailed Mr. Kruger on September 7th asking, among other things, or reporting that ORS is working on a particular rate case? Take your time and read this. Some information, and then a question for the accounting committee. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Is it routine for you to ask other folks about the adjustments you're considering in an audit?
Very much so. In all my experience as an auditor, we tend to, in order to come to our conclusion, to make sure we try to arrive at the proper conclusion, especially on situations that we either haven't seen before or unaware of, we try to gather all the information that we can gather to come to the proper conclusion. In this situation, I was referring to the unpaid Guastella invoices. And to give you an example, I'm a member of the South Carolina Association of CPAs. There's a forum out there for all CPAs who are members of SCAPA, can just reach out to any CPA in South Carolina to try to gather the evidence to come to the proper and correct conclusion. And that's exactly what I was doing here.
Okay. So you didn't know how to deal with this issue, and you asked this fella from Iowa.
Objection, that's a mischaracterization of his testimony.
Did you know what to do with the situation described in your email?
Regarding the unpaid invoices, I was just trying to make sure I came to the proper conclusion.
Did you have a conclusion prior to writing this email?
I did, and I wanted to make sure it was the right conclusion, so I sent this email to make sure I was handling it the correct way.
And did Mr. Kruger agree with you?
He did not. His response, I believe, was, "This is interesting. I have never seen this before."
Got it. Did you check with anybody else about that issue?
I did not. Maybe just internally discussions.
Okay. Is there an ORS policy for what information employees are allowed or not allowed to share regarding pending applications with folks outside? I'll say that again. That was really bad. Sorry. Is there a policy in place at ORS that governs what you folks as employees are allowed to share with non-ORS employees regarding pending rate applications?
I am not aware. I would imagine maybe Mr. Sullivan could answer.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've seen the email that we're talking about, and you know, we don't share any confidential information. I don't believe that email even has a name of a utility in it. So that email was just seeking general information. And so if ORS reaches out for information like that, especially from a committee like that, it's just in a general broad sense and not specific to a certain utility with information specific to that utility.
Is there a policy in place that limits what can and cannot be communicated to outside non-ORS folks?
I'm sure there is. I have not seen it in a long time, but I do recall when confidentiality became a big issue. It's been a while, but became a big issue. ORS did institute policies regarding that.
Okay, so we at least know that ORS is paying attention to confidential information and there are limits to what can be disclosed.
Correct.
Okay, that's all I was asking. With regard to the deferral of the reparations appeal rate case expenses, I understand your testimony to say that ORS's recommendation is consistent with the Commission's practice to defer litigation and related costs for pending cases where the outcome is unknown and undetermined. Is that right?
Yes.
If you chose to, could you advocate for a position contrary to what you state as the Commission's practice to defer litigation-related costs for pending cases?
Objection. It calls for speculation.
Can you rephrase that?
Sure. When you cited the Commission's practice to defer litigation-related costs for pending cases where the outcome is unknown and undetermined, did you believe that that practice limited your ability to recommend otherwise?
No, I don't think so.
Is there an ORS policy or guidance that identifies situations where the Commission has made previous decisions and ORS should take positions consistent therewith?
I don't know if there's a policy specifically, but we tend to take positions that the commission has ordered in the past.
And why is that?
I would believe that it's, if the commission has made a decision in the past, that's our position going forward, assuming the commission's going to take the same position. Part of.
So what independence does ORS have to make its own determination on those issues?
We do. We can make any recommendation we'd like, and at the end of the day, the commission's going to make the final decision.
But you just said on all of those issues that you do what the commission previously did.
Objection, I
No.
believe that's a mischaracterization.
That's sustained, just rephrase.
Sure. For the issues where you determine that, like in this case, the commission has, by its decision, demonstrated a likeliness to rule a particular way, do you take that position in your testimony?
That's part of my position, but we do, I mean, it's going to depend on the situation, but if it is something that has occurred in the past, then yes, we would lean towards what the commission had ordered in the past.
And is that because you want to produce a product that the commission will adopt?
No, I don't think that would be the main reason why, but I mean, we consider all factors. But at the end of the day, if we're making a decision and our decision is kind of leaning toward what has been done in the past, then I would say yes, then we're going to kind of lean with what the commission has done in the past.
Got it. You were here yesterday. Did you hear the testimony Mr. Guastella gave about the time value of money?
I did.
Okay. And what do you understand that issue to be?
In all honesty, I understand the theory behind the time value of money, but I couldn't calculate it.
Okay. Am I correct that ORS has included cash working capital allowance in the rate base?
Yes.
The cash working capital allowance recognizes the timing difference between when the company incurs operation and maintenance expenses during the billing periods and collects revenues from the customers, correct?
Absolutely.
So the cash working capital allowance in rate base provides an allowance for the time value of money, right?
In theory.
In theory or
Yes.
in reality?
Yes.
Okay. So the idea that a rate should never address the time value of money is not consistent with that position, is it?
I believe it would depend on what is being sought to be included in rate base.
Okay. By including cash working capital allowance in rate base, ORS is recommending that carrying costs be recovered in these rates.
For the cash working capital, that is related to everyday operating expenses.
Mr. Herpel, you've been very patient with me. Thank you. That's all I have, Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gressett. Commissioners, Vice Chair Powers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I'll start with you, Mr. Sullivan, if you don't mind. You've been, if I calculate right, you've been with ORS for some 15 plus years, 17 years, quite a while.
Yeah, I started in February of 2005.
Okay. So you are very, very familiar with Daufuskie and the ongoing appeals and different things in this case.
Yes.
Now, I'm brand new to it. Most of us are. And, you know, I've started as a prosecutor and spent I don't know what percentage of my life in a courtroom and observed people and that sort of thing. The emails raise questions. And I just want to ask a very blunt question. Do you feel that ORS in any way has held Daufuskie to a higher standard than any other utility you deal with?
No, we have treated Daufuskie consistently. I mean, it kind of goes back to what Mr. Herpel, what they were discussing with Mr. Gressett in regards to unamortized rate case expenses and rate base. I mean, that's our position in that is a position is consistent. Back to the plant and service that I discussed with Mr. Gressett, the standards that we're applying to Daufuskie is the standards we expect from any other utility that we regulate, whether it's Duke Energy Carolinas or a small water and wastewater company.
Okay. And if you had the evidence that you seek or the documentation, I think is a better word, that you seek, would ORS give an objective value as to what this $699,361, how it should be considered?
Yeah, and then again, the 699 number is now a 332 number.
You're right.
ORS has accepted certain items the company was able to support, and then the company, through Gary White's rebuttal testimony, accepted some of the removals. But no, back to your question. Yeah, I think at this point in time, it's pretty obvious that the original invoices that supported that are long gone. They're never going to be recovered. But the company Excel spreadsheets do not provide enough support for ORS to allow inclusion. So therefore, the company has to perform something else, an original cost study. ORS Witness Hunnell is more familiar with what is done when companies cannot produce supporting documentation. But yes, if the company had provided some supportable, verifiable, something that we could review for the inclusion of that plant, yes, ORS would have recommended inclusion.
Okay. And if I ask a question that's better for someone else, please tell me. There's been a lot of talk about reparations that are being considered. And I think Mr. Costella's emails indicate that he's positive he's going to win that issue. I don't know. But here's something I've kind of heard thrown around. If reparations are denied by the court, what appeal cost or rate case expenses for that portion do you think should be allowed, or does ORS consider?
The reparations is more of a Witness Herpel items he's addressed, but I mean, I'm happy to give an answer.
Mr. Herpel, would you take that?
I sure will. Yes, sir. Could you repeat the question, please?
There's been a lot of talk about the reparations case, and it's been in some of the emails that have been introduced in evidence. And there, of course, would be rate case expenses for just that. And there's been some questions to what they should be or what they should not be. If reparations are not allowed by the court, how should those expenses be treated?
Once the Supreme Court makes their decision, we would then request the invoices related to the reparations appeal from the company, and we would review those as ORS reviews all invoices, and we would make our determination at that time.
Okay, well, then my question, I guess, is a little premature. While I got you, I was going to ask, either one of you take this. What should happen, and this is another thing that's been tossed around a lot, what should happen with the excess taxes as far as by not refunding them to the ratepayers? Does that violate the 2018 order? And
yeah, that's my area.
Okay.
I don't know if it not returning to customers, if it violates that order. What it would do is violate what this commission has done in other dockets. What that order did, if I remember correctly, is told the companies, listen, we're going to deal with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act monies. You need to set aside those monies into a liability regulatory liability to then be handled in your next rate case before the commission. So I don't know if the order specified what was going to happen. It just specified that the companies were to put the money aside so that when they come into the rate case, they would have that money to give to customers, depending on the commission's decision.
Okay. And you've testified in other hearings about the Tax Jobs Act, all that sort of stuff, have you not?
Yes, I have.
And if I recall correctly in your testimony here, there's some talk about if it's paid back spread over a period of years, 5-year period or something.
Yeah, that's the recommendation of ORS Witness Hunnell, that the excess tax, federal tax collections included in rates, that those be returned to customers through over a 5-year period through a Tax Cuts and Jobs Act decrement rider.
Okay. I guess I need all 4 of y'all up here.
We're used to this. Or I'm used to this, sorry.
Okay. The question, and tell me if this belongs to Mr. Hunnell, the question of Mr. Guastella claiming besides owed fees that he's owed $1 million by money he's put into the company. Should that have been treated in the audit? He says that's something else. Do you think that amount of money should be included somewhere in the audit or in the determination of rate of equity or
in the company's capital structure, whether
capital
it should be
structure.
debt or equity? That's, sorry to do this again, that's ORS Witness McGlone. You know, I personally, from audit perspective, I'm not sure of the $1 million that Mr. Guastella is referring to. We know at one time there was a lot of unpaid rate case expenses, but what we saw through our review was that the company has caught up and has been paying Mr. Guastella for the rate case services. So I'm not really even sure about the $1 million, and I didn't see through the course of our audit where there was a payable to Mr. Guastella of $1 million. So that's about all the information I have on that, Mr. Powers.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll wait and save some of my questions. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
That's all I have.
We've been going about an hour and a half. I'm not foreclosing any commissioner questions, but let's take about a 10-minute break. Let everybody stretch their legs a little bit. Thank you. We'll be back at, wow. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Good morning and welcome back to the hearing in docket 2022-142-WS, the rate case application of Daufuskie Allen Utility Company Incorporated. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. We have with us virtually Commissioner Thomas and Commissioner Irvin, and present in the hearing room we have Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Commissioner Caston, Chair Belser. We are on first two witnesses from the Office of Regulatory Staff on commissioner questions. Commissioners?
Chair Belzer,
Commissioner Williams.
thank you very much. We've got to adjust. I've got some questions for you, Mr. Sullivan, so it's good to see you here and good to see your face.
Thank you.
You were responsible for calculating depreciation expense?
Correct.
Okay. Was part of your review to look at depreciation rates that the company used in its depreciation schedule?
Something floating around, sorry, that's what's making it. Yes, in conjunction with the Water and Wastewater Department, ORS witness Hunnell. He's gonna get mad at me if I keep putting things his way, but.
He's smiling. Did you have any concerns about the useful lives of the assets and whether they were incorrect or unreasonable?
We did not. We didn't make any changes to the useful lives they were using on their depreciation schedule. Now, in my direct testimony, we did, to calculate depreciation expense, we used the rates on their actual depreciation schedule. When the company filed their application, they had changed those some in their exhibit, and we didn't agree with that. We agreed with the actual rates on their depreciation schedule, which the company accepted in their rebuttal.
Okay. Do you believe a depreciation study is needed to determine what a reasonable depreciation expense amount would be?
I have to do it. I have to do it to them again. That's ORS witness Hunnell could better answer that question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. I may ask him this question as well, but I'm going to go ahead and ask you, and you may
Sure.
need to defer it. But how important do you think it is that there be an independent analysis of the depreciation?
I believe in our testimony we have said that it should be an independent analysis on both depreciation study and cost of service. But again, the word independent, I'll let Mr. Hunnell.
Okay. Okay. When you are auditing the and the assets, do you make sure the asset is still physically exist and being used and useful?
That is one of our the ORS team. I did not actually attend, but Mr. Herpel did, along with Mr. Hunnell, and I believe one of representative from our customer service or consumer services department actually performed a site visit to look at the assets that were in service.
Mr. Herpel, do you want to add anything to that? I guess I'm particularly interested in assets that aren't visible above ground.
Yeah, so on the site visit, we had a list of assets to look at, and they did take us and show us the assets that we had asked. But once again, as ORS witness Sullivan has done, I think Mr. Hunnell would be best to respond to that.
And I will say, Commissioner Williams, like we talked about earlier on the roll forward of plant, like when we make adjustments in prior cases, we cite assets in those cases, and then between that case and the next case, there's additions, and part of verifying that those additions are actually used and useful and providing service to customers, we'll look and make sure that they actually are doing such.
Okay. There's been a lot of talk about the utility plant and documentation and the $699 versus the now $332,000. It's confusing, particularly when this is the first case that we as a collective team have looked at it. Would you give me an overview, and then I would like for you to talk some, if it's appropriate, about the rebuttal exhibit JFG 1.
Okay. I'm gonna look at my attorney. I actually, based on, Commissioner, or Madam Chair Belser's, comment the other day, yesterday morning, I put together a sheet that I think shows how we started off. Again, I hate to mention the 717, but we started off with the 717 and how we are now at the 382. I don't know if that is something that
recognizing that this would be a bit unorthodox, I do have copies of this work paper that Mr. Sullivan had put together, provided a copy to counsel for DIUC yesterday. To the extent that it would aid in expediting the hearing and helping the commissioners receive answers to their questions, I'd be glad to provide copies.
I think that would be helpful, as stated on the first day, that all of the questioning, any of the testimony that's in is subject to that motion to strike.
I'll pass them up.
Any objection?
Subject to confirming the numbers, of course, we don't object. We want the commission to have what the commission needs.
Thank
and
you.
I'm sure Mr. Sullivan would have put exactly the accurate information in it.
Yeah, I believe the company and ORS are in agreement. Well, yeah, we're in agreement on the previously disallowed plant, what that remaining balance is. I don't think there's a disagreement there.
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Thomas. I have a question.
Commissioner Thomas, we will put that schedule on the Elmo if that will help y'all.
Well, that would be helpful, but also if it could be emailed, if that's possible.
It'll take a few minutes, but we'll put it on the Elmo. David, take that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I think we can get an emailed copy if I know where to send it to. That may help, or if y'all can scan it in, that may be easier.
We're sending somebody out to scan it and email it right now.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Williams, do you have other questions that we might go to before this to give the email a chance to get to our virtual commissioners?
That's a good question. Mr. Herpel?
Yes, ma'am.
The email that was on the Elmo, I'm going to tell you what I thought you were trying to do and ask if this is the case. And you gave an example, and I think that the individual who was with the national organization, who just happened to work for Iowa, said he would put it out to the members of the national organization to see if they had input.
Yes, ma'am.
Did they have input?
No, I got no response.
Okay.
So then I went a different avenue and issued additional discovery to come to my conclusion.
Okay. So this must be a novel, either it's a novel question or it just didn't gain any traction with that organization.
I agree.
Members.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate the clarity.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's it for my questions beyond what we have in front of us.
Do you mind if we come back to you for that?
Not at all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners with questions? Commissioner Caston, I see your light.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I think this is more geared to you, Mr. Sullivan, relative to the accumulated deferred income taxes, I think it's called, added. Has ORS found with other utilities, including other wastewater utilities, which I think you previously said, have you had similar recommendations with those other utilities as with this particular case?
Yes, and I think now might be a good time to talk about this a little bit. So The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, there's two pieces. We can say buckets since we were using buckets all week. You have what is on my exhibit DFS 9, which is what we call excess federal income taxes collected from customers. And what that's reflecting is the fact that when the rates were put in, they were put in using a 34% tax rate. And when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was effective, or became effective January 1st, 2018, that rate went down to 21%. So now included in rates is an additional 13% in federal income tax expense that will never be paid by the company to the federal government, or IRS. So that's that bucket. The other bucket is due to depreciation. And it's due to companies, for regulatory purposes, you calculate rates using straight line depreciation. But I'm not going to say all utilities, but most utilities for tax purposes, they accelerate depreciation. And so what that creates is what they call a timing difference in when the company is going to pay their taxes. Well, using straight line, the company is collecting more taxes than they actually pay to the IRS because they deducted more depreciation expense on their tax. What that creates is called ADIT, ADIT, Accumulated Deferred Income Tax. And since they have customer money up front, it's a liability because they're collecting through rates on straight line with a lower depreciation. Taxes, higher depreciation. So that creates a liability in rate base, ADIT liability. When that ADIT liability was calculated using a 34% tax rate. When the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was enacted in January 1st, 2018, that now caused the revaluation of ADIT, and it created EDIT. And that EDIT, since it's now taxes the company will never pay, the difference, that EDIT that was created, since that is taxes that will never be paid to the federal government, the IRS said you are to return that to customers. Now it goes a little further than that because there's different buckets within the EDIT bucket. You have certain types of EDIT that IRS says this is how you're going to give it back, and if you give it back any other way, you're in trouble. Basically, you're going to violate IRS tax normalization rules. So that's your protected property, plant, and equipment EDIT. But then you have two other buckets: non-protected property, plant, and equipment, and then another EDIT bucket that would be associated with them writing off uncollectibles faster than they do tax purposes than they might book purposes, creating again a timing difference. So my recommendation when we looked at the company books and records during this case, we noticed there was no ADIT. However, looking at their tax returns, we did notice that they are accelerating depreciation for tax purposes, therefore creating a difference in taxes. They're not using straight line for tax purposes like they are for rate making purposes. Therefore, there should be ADIT recorded on the books. We'll say the company doesn't agree. They have their reasons, but my recommendation in that regard for the ADIT is that the company hire a professional tax accountant to determine what the ADIT should be on the books of the company, and then take it a step further and figure out how much of that is EDIT, break that down even further into those protected and unprotected buckets, and so then we can deal with that in the next case on returning that to customers. I'm sorry, I'm sure that was kind of confusing. I'm sorry.
Well, that was a full meal.
It's tax. Tax is tough.
Well, thank you. I followed the higher level of that, but that was very helpful. I appreciate that very much.
And also my testimony, my direct testimony, pages, just so you don't have to go scrambling, my pages 23 through 36 kind of spell out all probably more eloquently than what I just did a minute ago in my testimony.
Well, I actually read that, but
Okay.
your going through it helped my understanding. So thank you.
You're welcome.
This is the third time we're going to have touched on this, the plant and service, but I'm not into the dollars right now. So if I understand from your earlier testimony and questions from Attorney Gressett, some of the equipment in the audit that's been discussed, and this would be relative to, I guess, the Melrose equipment and some of the Hague equipment, as I think it was earlier described, that for some of it, ORS only received spreadsheets. And on those spreadsheets, there were just some general terms, not specific equipment. Is that correct?
Maybe I didn't do a good job earlier. So what the company provided was let's say the column on the left is the date, and then in the middle, it would have some vendor names, and then it would have some dollar amounts on the right, and those would total to, let's say one of the assets in question was $25,000. I'm making that up, but say it was $25,000. It would show, okay, on these dates, these vendor invoices, these amounts, that's what adds up to the $25,000. That's what was shown on those spreadsheets. And for other equipment, there might have been some question marks in the date column. There might have been some question marks in the vendor column. But they would have some amounts that would add up to a specific item and plant that was in dispute.
Okay. So let me ask this. Does a normal audit practice simply assume reasonableness of the data provided, or does it rely on your audit and review? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you asked this, Mr. Casson. I'm just reflecting on Gressett and our discussion earlier. I just wanted to make sure that it didn't get on record that we think what was provided by the company was reasonable. So I think that's why Gressett and I mean, in audit, I look at it a different way. We say trust, but verify. And so I guess if you want to replace the trust with reasonableness, it's reasonable on the face, but then you have to verify it. So I like the term trust, but verify from an audit perspective.
I've heard that before. But, all right, let me ask this. I guess I'm asking the same question, maybe a different way. So in your professional opinion, it would not, I guess, serve the normally accepted audit practice standard to just assume everything is reasonable before you review it, correct?
Correct. Again, I feel like this part's killing me. I mean, I go back to, on the face, when you get information, you can't verify 100% of it, so you have to assume that a portion of it's reasonable, right? But then when you select an item and you go to ask for more support and they can't provide it, then that's, you've kind of lost the presumption of reasonableness there.
All right, let me ask this question kind of related to that too, because there's been discussion over the course of the past couple of days about this. Is it ORS's responsibility to prove plant and service cost, or is it the company's burden?
My understanding since I've been in ORS, the burden of proof is on the company. ORS verifies that proof is supported.
All right, I'm going to switch over to a couple, three other questions, and I'm done. And these may be yours, or you may say, no, that's Mr. Hunnell. I just looked at the inspection sheets, and I think you, Mr. Hunnell, and another gentleman whose name I've forgotten were on those as far as the physical and actual site visit, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yesterday, maybe the day before, I can't recall, there were discussions about generators, empty tanks. While it wasn't absolute, think they run every day. In, I guess, your inspection of other utilities, is it a requirement or standard practice? Assuming the generators are run every day, I don't know. Is that some sort of requirement or standard practice for generators to be standby generators to be run every single day?
I know you're not going to like this answer, but I think Mr. Hunnell would be best to answer that question, sir.
No, I mean, that's fine. I'll tell you what, I'll just wait on Mr. Hunnell. No more questions, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Commissioner Williams, I think the document has been sent to our remote commissioners, so do you want to go ahead? Let me just ask this. Commissioner Irvin, Commissioner Thomas, did you get the exhibit? Do we need to put it on the Elmo?
I have it, thank you.
Okay.
I'm checking my email now. I'll let you know if I do not have it.
Thank you, sir.
William, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Belzer.
So, yeah, I don't remember, oops, sorry. I don't remember the exact question, but I thought this might help. So what I've tried to do on this worksheet is start off with what was determined that was really the original amount of plant in dispute. I know the 699, 361 has gotten the most attention, but really after looking at it, it was $717,812 in dispute, and it was due to, which is in my direct testimony, it was due to a test year adjustment the company made in the 2014 docket of $18,000 and something dollars. So we identified all the items that comprise the 717,812. Through discovery, the company was able to provide support for the three items you see below the 717: land, costs related to Melrose, and some Guastella associate fees. ORS allowed those. So that in my direct testimony, I indicated that there was $448,236 still in dispute. Then through the rebuttal testimony of company witness White, the company accepted all removal of plant from the 2005 docket and some additional items. What I tried to do, and I'm sorry if it did not come out great, it looked great on the computer, but what I tried to do on my surrebuttal exhibit DFS 5 is highlight in gray the amounts that the company accepted. So that brings us down to the 332 I've referred to as 988 in my testimony. I've got a $3.50 rounding variance. That's what happens when you put a lot of decimals on exhibits. But my exhibit, I wanted, ORS typically doesn't put decimals on exhibits, but I wanted to identify the plant specifically dollar by dollar. So surrebuttal exhibit DFS 5 and what you were given should go together. So the 332,988 would be the items on my surrebuttal exhibit DFS 5 that are not highlighted in gray, and still the 2005 docket's gone now. Still refer to docket 2011 or docket 2014.
Mr. Sullivan, you just mentioned a 332,988 number,
Correct.
and then on this new, and the submittal that we're looking at now, we're talking about 332,984 and 50 cents.
Yeah, there's a 350 round in variance.
I see that.
Okay.
And you footnoted it. Okay.
Please don't ask me to find that.
No, no. So the question is, and I'm asking this as a question, the $332,000 is what we, at this point, you all believe is not identified and supported as plant and service.
Correct.
So I'm looking at rebuttal exhibit JFG 1. Was that submitted to support the 332,000?
Well,
I realize you didn't.
Yeah.
You didn't submit this, but is that in general? Is that related? About
yes, they are related,
Okay.
but I have a similar question as yours. Because if you look at the top of that exhibit on the left, it says Melrose Bloody Point. And as we discussed earlier, the 332,988 is not comprised 100% of Melrose Bloody Point plant. There's also a portion of it that was removed in the 2011 docket associated, and maybe even, no, it's just 2011 docket associated with Hague Point. So I identified the items that Commissioner Thomas noted the other day about the JCG 1 exhibit, where there were some discrepancies. But also that it leads to additional questions, just because up top it talks about Melrose Bloody Point. That is only, from my calculations, that is only $178,000 of the $332,988 that's in dispute. There's $154,900 associated with Hague Point. Now,
And how can I know that?
good question. What I did
Is there anything on JFG 1 that tells us that?
no.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I'm sorry, there's nothing on my Surrebuttal Exhibit DFS 5. Now, I have identified that. I have it in front of me. I can go through it if you would like to go through my Surrebuttal Exhibit DFS 5, and I can tell you which items are Melrose Bloody Point and which ones are Hague Point. Now, I don't know if the company, this is not something that's been discussed, so I don't know if they would agree with this or not. But I determined how much was related to Melrose Bloody Point and how much was related to Hague Point using the depreciation schedule. There's actually a column that identifies the system that it's supposed to be associated with.
I hate to say this, but I'm inclined to say let's do it.
Okay, it won't take long.
Okay.
Okay.
That makes it even more enticing.
Do you-
So I'm looking at DFS 5, page 1 of 5.
Do you have the Surrebuttal exhibit or the? Okay, that's the one.
Can you
that's the
tell
one
us,
we want.
since there are 5 pages, will you track which page
Yeah, we're
you're on?
just going to go through page 1 and 2.
Great.
3 doesn't have any removals on it, so
Okay.
it's just going to be 1 and 2. And so we're going to skip the land category up top
Okay.
and move to the mains, hydrants, and surfaces.
Okay.
So you see the section there identified ORS removals. The first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are Melrose Bloody Point, and the last 3 is Hague Point.
So water mains, gravity sewer mains, and project number 212966399. Okay.
Those are Hague Point. The next grouping, meters, there's only one removal there. Though for $1,000, that's Hague Point.
How do you know this?
Using the company's depreciation schedule, which is way more detailed than my exhibit DFS 5.
Okay.
There was a column on there that identifies the system, and it either said MBP or HP. And so I'm assuming.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're good on the meters? That was all?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then if you jump to the water treatment plant,
Okay.
as indicated, there's a middle section there that's not highlighted in gray. The first, the first two are Melrose Bloody Point, and the last three are Hague Point.
So water treatment equipment, chlorinators, treatment and disposal equipment, or Hague Point.
Correct.
Okay.
So next page, for structures T and D, the only removal there, that is Hague Point.
Okay.
For T and D plant, there's 3 removals there. The first 2 are Hague Point. The last one is Melrose Bloody Point.
T&D plant per books.
Correct.
Am I in the right place?
Yeah,
T&D pumping equipment.
Yeah, the 2 T&D pumping equipments are Hague Point related.
And the 25 horsepower vertical is
Melrose.
Melrose.
And then we're going to jump all the way down to general plant. It's kind of in the middle of the page.
Okay.
These are tools. The tools are all designated as being associated with Hague Point.
Okay.
And then the last category on the bottom, wastewater pumping plant. There's 3 removals there. They're all Hague Point. And I believe that's it. Those should comprise the 332, 988.
Okay.
Still in dispute.
So I want to look with you at JFG 1, the cost per Compass South appraisals and the vintage cost analysis. And I think that when Commissioner Thomas was going through this with Mr. Guastella, I think, the cost per books number was $380,363, although I might have sat up here and calculated it.
Per my calculations, you calculated correct.
Okay. Tell me generally the relationship between that 380 and, if it's appropriate, the 332. If it's an inappropriate question, I'll ask it.
It is not an inappropriate question, but it does make it a little more confusing, because I did agree the cost per books column. I was able to agree each category back to the company's depreciation schedule. However, some of that now has been agreed upon by the company as they're not seeking recovery of it anymore. So that per book number actually gets smaller, and I do not have that number.
So to my non-accounting sense, it sounds like we're kind of we might be double counting if we were to use the vintage cost analysis, if some of it's been removed already.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, since the company has agreed to some of it, some of the disallowances, yes. If you added back in the 380, you would be adding in some amounts the company has already agreed to disallowance of.
I may have other questions, Mr. Sullivan, but I'm gonna end my questioning. I may come back with further, but I'd like to hear what other commissioners have to say.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Thomas?
thank you. So I guess let's just continue this conversation. And I guess basically it's, the company's responsibility, I think, to present the evidence that supports their argument. And this has been going on for a long time. And just looking at this exhibit, and it's just not something that is, anywhere close to being easy to follow. I guess what I'm wondering then at this point is, would a depreciation study or some other sort of an independent study help to come up with something that is reasonable? I mean, the supporting documentation, I think, pretty much everybody agrees at this point it's not available. But there's some assets out there and they're probably being used and they probably still have some remaining book value. But we just, in trying to figure it out, don't see anything that really helps us to understand within a reasonable number what should be the number, even just rounded. Do you think that a depreciation study or some other type of independent study could help us get to that point?
And I'm going to do it again. ORS Witness Hunnell is in his experience over the years, can probably speak to what he believes is most appropriate. I'm not sure if a depreciation study would get you there, and maybe ORS Witness Hunnell will confirm this, but I think some kind of original cost study would need to be performed for these remaining items.
Okay. Mr. Herpel.
Yes, sir.
There was some discussion about the historic test period, which has traditionally been used in South Carolina for, as far as I know, a very long time. And is it your understanding that that is a widely respected and used rate making practice, not just in South Carolina, but in other places?
I believe, I'm not sure about other jurisdictions, but are you referring to the inflation, the historic 12-month test year?
No, actually, I'm just asking about the concept of the historic test period as the starting point for a rate case. Is that something that's widely accepted, not just in South Carolina?
My understanding is, and I understand South Carolina, yes, but I understand there are other states that may approach their applications differently, but I'm only familiar with South Carolina at this point based on what I've performed. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. And do you believe that ORS is independent of the Public Service Commission and that ORS can make whatever recommendations that it feels are appropriate in a particular case?
I do.
Okay. I think that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioners?
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Irvin?
Thank you. And just to follow up on Commissioner Thomas's question, what makes the Office of Regulatory Staff independent in your work product, your own work product, also includes a prohibition for the Public Service Commission or our staff to even communicate with you in an ex parte fashion about this. Is that correct?
I believe so, sir, yes.
Well, I want somebody to tell me with certainty because
yes.
Can I have a yes or no answer?
Yes.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Because we have no role in the auditing function, correct?
Absolutely correct.
and then you make recommendations, and we ultimately decide the case based on the greater weight, the evidence, who prevails on their burden of proof. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Could be you, could be the company, could be interveners, but that's what we do, right?
I agree.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I want to go back to some of the principles that I think you may use in your auditing and accounting function. First of all, are you a licensed certified public accountant in South Carolina?
Yes, sir, I am. My license is active.
Right. Tell me a little bit about what we call the GAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. Is that something that the Office of Regulatory Staff utilizes in its audits and reviews?
We do. Absolutely.
Right.
We use GAP as an approach as well as regulatory.
And I think I recall that's what the United States has adopted through, is it the International Financial Reporting Standards? I think is international is different from the United States. Help me out there.
That is correct. We use the United States generally accepted accounting principles, and it's stated in auditors' opinion letters when you do a financial statement audit.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Straighten me out on that. Why is it important for auditors to use the GAP standards? What are the principles that support it?
Well, when you approach an audit, obviously independence is number one when it comes to ethics, and you approach an audit with objectivity and unbiased, and every audit is approached that way. And we apply the GAP standards in our approach to make sure we determine or come to our conclusion that we, I guess, derive from our testing and applying GAP in our auditing practice.
And is consistency one of the guiding principles? In other words, you treat all comers the same. Isn't that true?
We do. Consistency is good. I think as an accountant and an auditor, consistency is good. Yes, we like consistency.
And let's talk a little bit about regulated utilities. I suppose there's some specific rules that you apply specifically when you're considering regulated utilities in South Carolina. Is that correct?
That is correct. There are certain standards for regulatory as opposed to certain standards when you do a financial statement audit.
Could you talk about some of those for us generally?
The differences?
Yes, specific to regulated utilities.
Well, the big difference would be when you do a financial statement audit, you're presenting, are the financial statements presented fairly? And in a regulatory audit, you apply regulatory principles because you're auditing to the application and adjustments made to that application to arrive at the rate setting.
And so in the utility regulation, which is a business that we're in here, inconsistencies, errors, or omissions matter, don't they?
Absolutely, and I would say that even applies over to the financial statement audit as well.
And a lack of documentation matters, doesn't it?
100%, yes. You can't make a determination if you don't have the supporting documentation to assist you in making that determination.
Thank you. No further questions.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Irvin. Gentlemen, good morning. Still.
Good morning.
Couple of questions. Mr. Sullivan, when you were answering questions about the ADIT, EDIT, and Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, you indicated that the IRS says. Have there been IRS directives or opinions issued with regard to the ADIT and EDIT?
Yes, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was law, and then after that was signed into law, I believe, utilities and others are like, what are we supposed to do with this? And so therefore, the IRS issued guidance, and they specifically spell out how about the EDIT. That goes back to what I was talking about, the normalization violation. So yeah, there's I don't know if you call them letters, rulings. I'm not sure of the exact.
I couldn't remember what the IRS letters, or I think.
Yeah, and it's because people say, what are we supposed to do? When I say people, businesses, utilities, corporations,
taxpayers.
They're like, what are we supposed to do? We want to make sure. So then the IRS issues guidance or letters or rulings, opinions. It's one of those. I can't remember.
And when ORS makes these recommendations regarding the ADIT, EDIT, have y'all reviewed those guidance letters or rulings or have y'all tried to apply those? Is
Correct.
that what you're going by?
Correct, and we're going by the fact that we did that when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed in 2017. You don't really hear much about it now because it's kind of passed. But there was so many trainings and seminars and documents and produced during that time period that said this is how you need to treat ADIT, EDIT.
Was there any communication? I know that. Or I think my memory is that ORS filed a petition with the commission about how to treat or how to handle the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and that's where the order that has been referenced came out in that docket. Does that sound familiar?
It does sound familiar.
Okay.
I don't remember the exact letter, but I'm sure ORS. I remember ORS filing something stating what we believed should happen in that order.
And at that time, do you happen to recall if there were any IRS letters or rulings, opinions issued at that time, or if those came out later?
I do not recall.
Okay. But the commission did issue an order, and it's been referenced a few times here about the utilities creating the regulatory liability. Is that correct?
2018-308, I believe. Let me confirm.
And
yes, that's it.
And ORS confirmed, and I believe utility witnesses also stated they did not create that regulatory liability.
Correct. There was no liability on the books and records of the company for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
And so at this point, is it ORS's recommendation that I think you said a third party or independent CPA or tax accountant look at the books of the utility to determine the amount of what that regulatory liability should be?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I think we've heard testimony that they have a tax accountant. Is that considered independent for ORS?
Yes, and I would think, I don't know the tax accountant they use, but that might be the appropriate one to use because they should be familiar with what depreciation they have sped up for tax purposes as compared to book purposes.
Well, I think where I reckon when we talk about third party and independent, I mean, are we saying that somebody totally separated that has, as you just mentioned, no knowledge of this taxpayer, so let's use taxpayer, to have to come in and review all of these books? Or does that meet with ORS's recommendation that it might be somebody that does tax work for this company? They could do it.
Correct.
Okay. With regard to the ORS disallowance, and this may cover both of you, of rate case, I say rate case expenses, but that bucket of rate case expenses related to the open Supreme Court decision, ORS is not recommending that those be disallowed at this time. Is that correct?
That is correct, ma'am. We are not proposing a disallowance. We just propose a deferral until the Supreme Court makes their final decision. At that time, ORS will review those invoices and make our determination at that time. And
Mr. Harple, in your rebuttal, you I think you had a couple of invoices, maybe 570 and maybe 564 that seemed duplicative.
Yes, ma'am. I had four that are duplicates, and then I had I had four in total, but there was one in question, invoice
The
570.
570.
I just need to seek clarification from the company, or we will make a decision. But I know the company responded through discovery that it's not a duplicative invoice. But when I read the description and when I read the dates covered and I read the hours charged by employee at Guastella and Associates, besides the engineering charge, everything else is the same. So to me, on the face of it, when I look at them, I think they're duplicates.
Okay.
So I'm just seeking clarification.
And the company did not, before you're sitting here today, they have not provided any clarification that would alleviate your concern.
They responded, and they responded that both were valid, and that's when I obviously went back and looked at them again, and I don't know what I'm missing, but they appear to be duplicate invoices to me, especially the date covered. They both say they cover July 1 to July 31, and the hours charged are the same with the exception of the engineer.
Okay. Yeah. Did ORS, this can be for either one of you, did ORS conduct an exit interview with the utility?
We did. ORS witness Sullivan handled the exit interview, so he may be able to best answer any questions you have related to that.
Well, I know at that point, we didn't have rebuttal exhibit GCW1. Or when was the exit interview conducted? Was that prior to ORS filing direct or testimony?
Yes, and Mr. Gressett or one of our attorneys, it was either the day before or 2 days before we filed direct.
But you basically would have advised the utility at that time where you were in your direct and where you were in your audit and your findings.
Correct. We handed out, at the time, we called them our draft exhibit DFS 1, 2, 3, and 4, and maybe 8.
Okay.
We provided to the company and let them know, hey, this could change. We still have 2 days, and we're buttoning up some items, but we believe this is what we are going to file on the testimony due date. I don't think we made any changes after the exit.
That's fine. My question is, with regard to this plan and service that's been going on for years, was there any indication to the utility that plan and service that was being removed by ORS included Hague Point property as well as Melrose and Bloody Point?
No, we made aware for what was going to be in my direct testimony that there were still $448,236 in disputed plant. Throughout the process, I identified the exact assets that were in dispute. Sent them, in fact, on the request, it was 3-7, which you can, that's in my original my direct testimony, DFS 11. It's request 3-7. Yes.
That's page 18.
Yes, page 18 of 38. Thank you. It'll note that we have items highlighted in green, yellow, and orange. The green and yellow represented new additions. It's the 2014 docket, but the items in orange represented, and we just said approximate $699. But the items in orange identified the assets that comprised the plant service that was in dispute. And through 3-7, that is where we requested documentation, which I don't have the date that this
But
was
in
sent
in that documentation where those colored highlights, the different colored highlights, that documentation did identify whether it was Hague Point, Melrose, or Bloody Point.
It was I highlighted those items on the depreciation schedule provided by the company.
And that's my question. On that schedule, it was identified where those items were located?
Correct.
Okay. There have been discussions for ORS to accept updated rate case expenses through the hearing. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Do y'all has there been a cutoff date established of when those expenses need to be provided to ORS?
I'm not aware if we've communicated that yet.
Okay.
That is definitely something that needs to be communicated.
I'm going to ask the attorneys to get together, figure out a cutoff date, because we need to know when to expect. And I'm going to ask at some point that we reserve a late filed exhibit for that. There just always seems to be a hole when we don't have a late filed exhibit for that. There seems to be a hole in the record. So I'm going to ask that y'all do that, and let's take care of that before the end of the hearing, just so we have dates and a exhibit reserved. Gentlemen, thank you. Appreciate your attention.
Thank you.
Commissioner Carolee Williams, I see your light on.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. My question was whether we needed to admit whether someone wanted to move into evidence the piece that Mr. Sullivan covered that starts out Daufuskie Island utility for the test year and talks about the total plant and service.
Yes, I was planning to do that through redirect, but now would be a wonderful time. So ORS would ask to move in the document identified by Mr. Sullivan. I'm identifying the remaining disputed plant and service into the record as the next hearing exhibit.
Any objection?
None from the applicant, Your Honor, but for completeness purposes, Mr. Sullivan's been talking about the information provided, particularly by the utility in response to request 3.7. I'd be happy to supply that as a hearing exhibit as well.
Is that not what, I think what's in his, isn't that the response?
There's a written response, and then there are multiple attachments there too.
Okay, let's handle this one first. Mr. Knowles, this exhibit prepared with regard to total plant and service in dispute, DFS direct testimony, page 14, will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit 15 and received into the evidence of this case. Okay. Hang on a minute, Mr. Gressett. Okay. Counsel, you've heard Mr. Gressett's proffer.
Provided, as long as Mr. Gressett, as long as Mr. Sullivan can take a look at the document and confirm it's the document that he was discussing with the commission, we'd have no objection.
Would you show that to him?
Certainly.
Let's see.
There's a response and a supplemental response. I'll get them and we'll confer, and after the next break, we'll be ready.
All right, so if y'all take care of that. Is that all the exhibits? Okay. Any further questions, commissioners? Any redirect for either witness?
Briefly from Mr. Sullivan.
Please proceed.
I have a few for Mr. Herpel as well.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sullivan. Let's see. Mr. Gressett had talked with you about your testimony in the 2005 Melrose docket. You recall providing that testimony for production by ORS?
I believe I included it in the discovery to be sent to the company, including the work paper.
Right. Did you review ORS's production?
that was sent or before it was sent, yes, I did.
And did you review what was actually produced?
I don't believe I did.
Oh, okay. Well, subject to check, that testimony was produced to DIUC on October 6th. Would you accept that?
Yes.
Let's see, Mr. Sullivan, relating to the 2011 settlement, there was some discussion about the roll forward of ORS's plant adjustment. Do you recall if the settlement adopted by the commission in that docket, 2011-229 WS, kept the door open to the roll forward?
I don't know if it specifically kept the door open, but I'm sure it contained the language that that was a settlement agreement. I'm sure it contains the language that's usually in our settlement agreement that it doesn't prohibit or parties from bringing forth positions in the next case.
Okay, so that order you could just look at the order. Okay. Oh, you're nodding, yes.
I don't have the order with me, but yes, you could look at the order, and I'm sure the settlement agreement's attached. And you know, I believe in the past it's what the company has used to say why they could still continue to bring the plant forward. So the opposite would be true too.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Gress discussed with you about PUI Order 2020-561. Do you recall when PUI in that docket filed its appraisal?
I don't recall the exact date, but I believe the company had completed their appraisal before they even filed a rate case.
Let's see, Mr. Sullivan, just quickly, you talked about trust but verify. During an audit, you don't disallow anything prior to having conducted a review, right?
Correct.
So if you don't review something, you don't remove it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Huber?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Herpel, you were asked a few questions regarding inflation, correct?
Yes.
Am I correct if the company experiences significant inflation in the coming years, it could come in for another rate case?
Yes.
If the company were to come in for a rate case, would there be a true up for inflation in the rates that had previously been approved? Would the customers get a refund for inflation that had been collected in prior rates?
My understanding is once those inflation adjustments have been embedded in rates, then when they come back in for another rate case, then we would look at their test year and then adjust based on what their operating expense experience is with the new application.
But there would not be a refund of prior amounts collected as operating expenses, correct?
Correct.
You were asked a few questions regarding an email that was sent to Blake Kruger with the Nusuka, that you asked me to circulate to the Nusuka Accounting or Water Committee, correct?
Yes, sir.
And there was an original email that you sent to Mr. Kruger, correct?
Yes.
Subject to, are you aware that original email was included in ORS's initial production to the company on October 11th?
Yes, the original email was issued through the initial company's discovery response. Yes, that's correct.
And then there was a second email that the response from Mr. Kruger, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it was realized subsequently that that response had not been produced, correct?
Yes.
And once it was realized that had not produced, ORS produced it, correct?
Yes.
So it was not intentional that that response was not included in the original production, correct?
As I stated earlier, that was not on purpose.
Does ORS generally, does ORS follow commission orders?
Yes.
Am I correct? If a commission order is unappealed, presumably it sets just, reasonable policies, rates, and standards for utilities?
Yes.
Because that's part of the commission statutory charge, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Herpel, you were asked a few questions about the site visit by the commissioners that you did at Daufuskie, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall the day that you did the site visit?
I do. It was a Friday. It was August 26th.
Are you aware, subsequently, when the company filed a rebuttal, we can wear the Compass South appraisal, correct?
Yes.
Are you aware the letter that's included in JFG 1 indicates the appraiser was on the island the same day you were, correct?
I'm familiar with that.
Did you see the appraiser that day?
We did not.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. Consumer Affairs, any limited recross? Mr. Pringle, any limited recross? Don't think too hard.
I'll say no.
Mr. Gressett, recross on redirect only.
Thank you. Mr. Herpel,
Yes.
when an order is on appeal, I didn't really hear the question, so I want to be sure I understand. Were you saying that the order on appeal is just, fair, and reasonable? That you assume it is? I'm sorry, what did you just ask?
The question I was asked, if an unappealed order.
Unappealed, thank you.
No
No further questions.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony. You may stand down.
Thank you. Thank you.
Miss Cindy, you doing okay? ORS, you want to call your next witnesses?
Yes, ma'am. ORS would call its next panel of Elizabeth McGlone and Daniel Hunnell.
Council, we will probably take a short lunch break. It may be shorter than usual if that's okay with everyone.
It's fine, we're happy to keep moving.
But we'll at least get started. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, you.
All right, if you'll both raise your right hands, do you affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury? Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if it pleases the Commission, Mr. Huber and I will also split this panel, and I will present Ms. McGlone.
Thank you, Mr. Knowles. Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Ms. McGlone. Would you please state your name and occupation?
Certainly, Elizabeth P. McGlone.
Are you the same Elizabeth P. McGlone who caused to be pre-filed 58 pages of direct testimony on September 29th, 2022, along with 6 exhibits marked EPM 1 through EPM 6?
I am.
Did you also cause to be pre-filed 10 pages of surrebuttal testimony on October 20th, 2022?
Yes.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed testimony or exhibits?
Yes, I have 3 small corrections to my direct testimony, none of which affect my recommendations. On page 8, line 15, the word downward should be struck. On page 33, line 20, the figure $110,445.10 should read $110,045.10. And finally, on page 52, line 9, the figure 8.25% should read 8.31%.
And Madam Chair, we will plan to file corrected testimony in clean and red line of Ms. McGlone's direct.
Thank you, Mr. Knowles.
Ms. McGlone, subject to those corrections, if I asked you the same questions today as those posed in your pre-filed testimonies, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that the pre-filed direct testimony of Elizabeth McGlone, as corrected from the stand, and the pre-filed surrebuttal testimony of Elizabeth McGlone be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
I apologize. Did you ask for both direct and surrebuttal? Just direct?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Direct is corrected from the stand.
Okay. Ms. McGlone's pre-filed direct, as corrected from the stand, will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand, and Ms. McGlone's surrebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, we would also ask that the exhibits EPM 1 through EPM 6 to Ms. McGlone's pre-filed direct testimony be marked as a consolidated hearing exhibit and entered into the record as the next hearing exhibit.
Ms. McGlone's pre-filed direct exhibits DPM 1 through DPM 6 will be a consolidated exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit 16 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. McGlone, have you previously testified before this commission?
No, this is my first opportunity to testify before this commission.
Would you please describe your educational background and experience?
Certainly. I hold a Bachelor's of Business Administration degree in economics with minors in mathematics and international affairs, as well as an MBA from Marshall University. I also hold a certificate in epidemiology and biostatistics from Drexel University, and I am a CRRA, or a Certified Rate of Return Analyst, with the Society of Utility Regulatory and Financial Analysts, or SURFA.
Would you please describe your work experience prior to joining ORS?
Certainly. I joined ORS in October of 2018. Prior to that time, I was the Director of Research for the West Virginia State Tax Department's Research Division. In that role, I managed the day-to-day operations of the division, assisted and overviewed the production of the periodic reports that were required of that division. Every legislative session, my office was responsible for conducting analysis of fiscal notes, which would estimate the fiscal impact of proposed legislation for the West Virginia legislature to determine what tax impact may be expected. Some years we would have upwards of 100 fiscal notes. It was a very busy time for us. And then prior to my position with the West Virginia Tax Department, I worked for the Marshall University Center for Business and Economic Research. I held a variety of positions there and conducted mostly quantitative analysis, economic and fiscal analysis on a variety of topics.
Ms. McGlone, could you describe your work experience since joining ORS?
Certainly. When I joined ORS in October 2018, and since that time, I have been responsible for monitoring trends in credit markets and financial markets, familiarizing with the regulated utilities in South Carolina. I've also learned a substantial amount about utility regulation, and especially as part of utility regulation and rate making, the determination of an appropriate cost of capital for utilities. In this position, I've had the great opportunity of being able to work on, I believe it's about 12 rate of return rate cases, including ROE analysis in front of this commission, including the current case and the currently filed DEP rate case. And as part of that, with the exception of the Daufuskie case that's before us currently, I have worked with experts in rate of return analysis and cost of capital analysis. I was involved in hiring them and in managing them, working with them as they developed their analyses, wrote their testimony, provided feedback on their testimony, and such.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McGlone. And Madam Chair, I do just have one quick administrative note. I wanted to confirm that Ms. McGlone's exhibits were identified as EPM 1 through 6 and not DPM 1 through 6.
You're correct. I have it wrong in my notes. Thank you. They are EPM 1 through EPM 6. Thank you.
Ms. McGlone, did you prepare a summary of your testimony?
I did.
Would you please share your summary with the Commission?
Certainly. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the Commission. The purpose of my direct testimony in this proceeding is to determine an appropriate cost of capital recommendation for Daufuskie Island Utility Company. The cost of capital is comprised of 3 parts: the cost of equity, cost of debt, and capital structure. My direct testimony also responds to the direct testimony of company witness John Guastella. In rebuttal, I reaffirm ORS's recommendations for my direct testimony and respond to the rebuttal testimonies of company witnesses Guastella and Gary White. As a brief overview, the company requested a return on equity of 10.5%, a cost of debt of 6.68%, and a capital structure consisting of 64.9% equity and 35.1% debt in its application. The resulting cost of capital from the company's initial request is 9.16%. In rebuttal testimony, the company updated its cost of capital by adopting ORS's cost of debt of 6.81% and revising its capital structure to 60.55% equity and 39.45% debt for an overall weighted average cost of capital of 9.05%. By comparison, ORS recommends a cost of equity of 9.07% within a range of 8.41% to 9.73%, and a capital structure consisting of 51.99% equity and 48.01% debt. Including ORS's adjusted cost of debt of 6.81% adopted by the company in rebuttal, ORS's overall recommended cost of capital is 7.98%. To determine an appropriate return on equity for DIUC, I used 2 well-regarded and market-based cost of equity models that this commission has routinely relied upon when authorizing returns on equity for regulated utilities: the discounted cash flow model, or DCF, and the capital asset pricing model, or CAPM. My DCF analysis results in a range of 8.41% to 9.73% with a 9.07% midpoint, while my CAPM analysis results in a range of 7.46% to 8.23% with a 7.84% midpoint. I give greater weight to my DCF results and thus recommend the Commission authorize a return on equity of 9.07%. A return on equity set at this level would allow DIUC the opportunity to earn a fair, just, and reasonable return based on current market conditions. ORS's recommended cost of debt, which is 13 basis points higher than the company's request, is 6.81%. I derive this figure from the test year interest expense, the issuance costs reflected on the company's executed 2018 loan closing statement annualized over the 5-year term of the company's debt, and the outstanding balance of the current debt as of the end of the test year. To determine an appropriate capital structure, I reviewed the company's actual annual capital structures over the last 5 years and the actual annual capital structures of the ORS proxy group of 7 comparable companies. ORS recommends the Commission adopt a capital structure of 51.99% equity and 48.01% debt, as this capital structure approximates the 5-year average of the proxy companies used to determine an appropriate return on equity. The company's requested pro forma capital structure includes changes to debt and equity capital that it anticipates through calendar year 2022. The company demonstrates that these data points are not known and measurable in its rebuttal testimony, by updating its pro forma capital structure estimate inclusive of an equity ratio that is 435 basis points lower than the projected equity balance filed 4 months prior in its application. Further, the company's actual capital structure for the test year of 63.61% equity and 36.39% debt is heavily weighted toward equity and is more than 1,100 basis points higher than the average of the ORS proxy group. Authorizing a capital structure at this level would be excessive for rate-making purposes and should be rejected. With respect to witness Guastella's direct testimony, I find that his ROE recommendation is not market-based, is unsupported, and should be rejected by this commission. Mr. Guastella suggests that his proposed return on equity of 10.5% is supported by methods used in Connecticut, Florida, and Massachusetts. My review of these methods show that Connecticut and Florida are more supportive of my return on equity recommendation than Mr. Guastella's, and that Massachusetts methods are arbitrary and should be wholly rejected. In brief, Mr. Guastella suggests that DIUC's return on equity should be 9.69% before adders by the Connecticut methods and 8.82% by the Florida methods. My direct testimony shows that using the most recent data available, the Connecticut and Florida methods indicate returns on equity of 9.07% and 9.45% respectively. It is important to note that no similar process used by any of these jurisdictions has been established either in South Carolina statute or regulation or by the Commission. Further, the returns on equity used by both Connecticut and Florida rely on market-based cost of equity analysis, such as DCF and CAPM, and the use of proxy groups that Mr. Guastella and the company suggest do not apply to DIUC. By comparison, ORS's recommended return on equity of 9.07% within a range of 8.41% to 9.73% is market-based and conforms to the principles set forth in the U.S. Supreme Court's Hope and Bluefield opinions and the methods and standards adopted by this commission. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Ms. McGlone. And I'll yield to Mr. Huber.
Mr. Huber?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hunnell, would you please state your name and occupation?
My name is Daniel Hunnell. I'm employed by the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff as a regulatory manager.
Are you the same Daniel Hunnell who pre-filed 21 pages of direct testimony in this case on September 29th, 2022?
I am.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed testimony?
I do not.
If I ask you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
They would be.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that Mr. Hunnell's direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Hunnell's pre-filed direct testimony would be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hunnell, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 5 exhibits labeled Exhibit DPH1 through Exhibit DPH5, which were filed with the Commission as attachments to your pre-filed direct testimony?
I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your exhibits?
I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that witness Hunnell's labeled exhibits DPH1 through DPH5, which were included with his pre-filed direct testimony, be marked for identification and entered into the record of this case as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Hunnell's exhibits DPH1 through DPH5 that were pre-filed with his direct testimony will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit 17 and admitted into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hunnell, are you also the same Daniel Hunnell who pre-filed 5 pages of surrebuttal testimony, in this case on October 20th, 2022?
I am.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed surrebuttal testimony?
I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that Mr. Hunnell's pre-filed surrebuttal testimony be entered into the record of the case as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Hunnell's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be read into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Hunnell, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 2 exhibits labeled surrebuttal exhibit DPH1 and surrebuttal exhibit DPH2, which were filed with the commission as attachments to your pre-filed surrebuttal testimony?
I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to those exhibits?
I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that witness Hunnell's 2 exhibits labeled surrebuttal exhibit DPH1 and surrebuttal exhibit DPH2, which were filed with his pre-filed surrebuttal testimony, be marked for identification and entered into the record of the case as the next composite hearing exhibit.
The 2 rebuttal exhibits attached to Mr. Hunnell's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit 18 and entered into the record of the case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hunnell, do you have a summary of your testimony to present?
I do.
Thank you. Will you please present that summary?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. My testimony focuses on ORS's review of the application of Daufuskie Island Utility Company, which I will herein refer to as Daufuskie or the company, for an adjustment of rate and charges. Specifically, my testimony is focused on Daufuskie's compliance with this Commission's rules and regulations, Daufuskie's compliance with the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, or DHEC rules and regulations, the proposed rates that are required to produce the overall revenue requirement after ORS's recommended adjustments, ORS's examination related to customer growth and bad debt expense, ORS's recommendation that the company complete a cost of service study and a depreciation study prior to its next general base rate case, and finally, ORS's position related to the excess tax expense related to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. ORS's review indicates Daufuskie provided both water and wastewater service in compliance with the Commission's rules and regulations during the test year. In addition, according to DHEC's most recent compliance inspections, along with the company's 2021 Consumer Confidence Report, the company provided water service that met all safe drinking water standards, and the company provided wastewater collection and treatment services in accordance with DHEC's rules and regulations during the test year. In regard to revenues, ORS incorporated the results of various adjustments as discussed in surrebuttal testimonies of ORS witnesses Sullivan and Erpel. The calculation of ORS's proposed revenue requirements is shown in my surrebuttal exhibit DPH1. Surrebuttal exhibit DPH2 reflects the rate schedule necessary to produce the overall water and wastewater revenue requirements after ORS's recommended adjustments. ORS's evaluation indicates the company is not currently experiencing customer growth. Thus, ORS does not propose a customer growth adjustment in this case. In regard to uncollectible expense, ORS recommended a bad debt percentage be calculated using the 5-year historical average of net write-offs to revenues for the period of January 1st, 2017 to December 31st, 2021 of 8.35%. The company accepted both of these adjustments in their rebuttal testimonies. Other recommendations resulting from ORS's review include the recommendation that the company conduct and file a cost of service study and a depreciation study to coincide with the historic test year of the company's next base rate case. The company has not completed a cost of service study or any other type of analysis to determine the adequacy and equity of its current rate structure, nor has the company completed any type of analysis to support the depreciation rates the company is utilizing to calculate depreciation expense. Mr. Gostella does not disagree with ORS's recommendations to complete the studies. However, in his rebuttal testimony, he states, and I quote, "Under the management agreement with DIUC, Goswella Associates would undertake consulting service beyond routine management duties Accordingly, a separate cost of service study and depreciation studies will be performed by Gostella Associates, subject only to the approval of the president of DIUC," end quote. However, it is ORS's recommendation that to ensure that the company and its customers receive quality studies at a reasonable cost, The company should use competitive bid process to ensure that the company and its captive customers obtain the services of the most qualified consultant at a reasonable price. ORS has no issues with Gastella Associates completing the study, as long as after all of the bids, Gastella Associates is the most qualified consultant and the price being charged is reasonable. What is not reasonable is Gastella Associates just completing the studies at whatever price it chooses to charge the captive Daufuskie customers. Finally, ORS witness Sullivan reviewed the effects of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and determined that since January 1st, 2018, the company has charged customers $384,287 of excess corporate income tax expense. In order number 2018-308, this commission ordered South Carolina Utilities, subject to its jurisdiction, to create a regulatory liability and to defer the effects resulting from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The company does not dispute the fact it did not comply with this commission's order. My direct testimony recommends the excess corporate income tax expense should be returned to customers over a 5-year period, and my recommendation remains unchanged. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Hunnell. Madam Chair, Mr. Hunnell is now available for questions from the parties and the commission.
I think that this might be a good time. We're not going to finish before lunch, so let's just go ahead and break before we so we don't interrupt anyone's questioning of these witnesses. I do caution the witnesses to not discuss your testimony with counsel or anybody else. You can talk about the football games, the World Series start, and you can talk about how nice it is outside. Just don't talk about your testimony. Is an hour sufficient for everybody? Okay. Let's return at 1:45. And counsel, if you have a chance, could y'all talk about the late filed exhibit and when it would be due on the updated rate case expenses? Keeping in mind, we've got a proposed order date out there too. I think it's the 14th. Does that sound right? Okay. Thank you. We'll recess until 1:45.